I didn't expect her to notice, not really. But the second I walked in late, she looked up, and something in her eyes made my chest tighten. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was something I couldn't name. One look, one subtle smile, and I knew this was a lesson I'd never forget. Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The first thing I noticed when I walked into the classroom was the way she didn't look at me, at least, not right away. Her eyes were fixed on the stack of papers in front of her, yet the slight tilt of her head, the way her fingers hovered over the pen, betrayed a flicker of awareness. I could feel it before I even registered it, the sudden tightening of my chest, the heat crawling up my neck. "You missed class today," she said softly, not looking at me yet, letting the words linger between us. My throat went dry. It wasn't a reprimand, not exactly. There was something in her tone, sharp, deliberate, yet curiously intimate, that made every syllable land heavier than it should. I stepped closer, though I wasn't sure why. The space between us felt charged, almost electric. Her pen clicked against the desk, and I caught the faintest glance, her eyes flicking up, holding mine for just a heartbeat longer than polite. My heart skipped. My fingers brushed against the edge of my notebook, restless, needing to occupy some nervous energy. She leaned back slightly in her chair, the motion slow, deliberate. The subtle sway of her shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the faint chalk dust in the air, it was disarming. Every movement seemed weighted with unspoken meaning, and I couldn't tell if it was intentional, or just the way she carried herself. "I can show you what you missed," she murmured, and for a split second, the air between us seemed to shrink. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. Her gaze didn't waver. She was waiting, watching, testing me. My own hands itched to gesture, to touch, to do something, anything, but I froze, caught in the pull of her presence. Time slowed. The ticking of the clock was loud in my ears. The faint brush of her fingers across the page, the subtle tilt of her head toward me, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest. It was like the room had narrowed to just the two of us. And then she smiled, a little, barely there, but it carried a promise, a question, a challenge. I didn't know what lesson she was about to teach, but I knew it would be one I'd never forget. The classroom felt smaller now, though nothing had changed. Every movement between us seemed magnified. My hand brushed hers when I reached for a book, accidental, or maybe not. She didn't pull away. Instead, her gaze lingered, heavy and deliberate, and I felt my pulse spike. "Here," she whispered, leaning just a fraction closer to point at a note in my notebook. Her breath warmed my ear, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume. I tried to focus on the lesson, but the sound of her voice, soft and low, made it impossible. Every small motion, her fingers adjusting a page, her shoulder leaning toward mine, felt charged, alive. I tried to speak, but words stumbled in my throat. Instead, our eyes met, and I could almost hear her thoughts reflected in the flicker of her pupils. I shifted slightly, and our arms brushed again. Neither of us commented. Neither of us moved away. The silence between instructions was thick, almost unbearable. My hands fidgeted, and hers twitched, like both of us were aware of the unspoken pull that tethered us closer. Every glance, every brush, every near touch was layered with something unacknowledged. She leaned back just enough to catch her pen that had rolled off the desk, and my fingers grazed hers in the motion. My chest tightened. The smallest gestures, her smile when she caught my eye, the subtle tilt of her head, made the air between us feel electric. Time slowed. The ticking clock sounded unnaturally loud, each second dragging with tension. I could feel the heat of her presence like a tangible force, pushing me forward, holding me in place, daring me to cross a line I didn't yet understand. She glanced at me again, a faint smirk dancing at the corner of her lips, and I realized I was holding my breath. There was a promise in that look, but it was veiled, teasing. One wrong move, or one right move, and everything could shift in an instant. Time seemed to stretch, each second weighted with a quiet intensity. We were closer now, inches apart, and I could feel the rise and fall of her breath, subtle but undeniable. Every gesture, the brush of her hair against her cheek, the gentle shift of her shoulder, felt magnified, electric. "I didn't expect you here," I murmured, voice catching slightly. She tilted her head, a hint of a smile teasing her lips, and my chest tightened. There was something in the way she lingered near me, a magnetic pull that made it impossible to think clearly. She leaned over the desk, guiding me through a tricky note, and our knees brushed under the table. The contact was fleeting, but it made the air between us taut, charged with anticipation. I tried to focus on the page, on the lesson, but her presence swallowed every other thought. Her gaze kept finding mine, steady, deliberate. I could feel her studying me, testing me, challenging me without a single word. Every small accidental touch seemed purposeful, each brush of her fingers, the subtle shift in posture, the way she bent slightly closer to point at a line in my notebook. The classroom faded from my attention. The ticking clock, the low hum of other students, all became background noise to the rhythm of our proximity. My hand itched to reach, to close the space between us, but the tension held me in place, suspended between restraint and surrender. Every whispered word, every delicate movement, carried layers of unspoken meaning. My breath hitched when hers brushed against mine, and the smallest gestures, her smile at a joke I didn't quite make, the tilt of her head toward me, felt like a promise that neither of us could name. It was dangerous, thrilling, and irresistible. I knew we were teetering at the edge, balanced between what was safe and what we both wanted more than we could admit. Every motion now carried weight. She leaned slightly closer over the desk, and I felt the warmth radiating from her, subtle but impossible to ignore. The air between us thickened, charged with anticipation, each breath drawn heavy, deliberate. Her hand hovered near mine again, brushing ever so slightly as she shifted a page. My pulse jumped. I wanted to move, to close the gap, but some part of me hesitated, savoring the tension. The classroom around us faded to background noise, the ticking clock, the faint scrape of chairs, distant murmurs, all drowned by the electricity in the space we shared. Her gaze held mine longer than necessary, piercing, playful, teasing. The faint curve of her lips, the tilt of her head, the subtle arch of her shoulder, all these tiny details spoke louder than words. I was caught, suspended in that fragile, magnetic pull, aware that one small movement could tip the balance entirely. She leaned back slightly, just enough to straighten her posture, then leaned again toward me. The motion was hypnotic, almost dangerous. My fingers twitched, restless, wanting contact but restrained by the invisible line between desire and restraint. Every whisper she let slip, every subtle brush of skin, carried unspoken promise. The tension wasn't just palpable, it was nearly tangible, wrapping around us, pulling tighter with every glance. My breath caught when her hand brushed mine a second time, accidental or not. I could feel my own heartbeat, loud in my ears, as if the room itself had grown smaller, pressing us closer together. Every instinct screamed to act, but the risk, the anticipation, made the moment nearly unbearable. Just as the tension felt unbearable, the classroom door creaked open. A soft, unfamiliar voice floated in from the hallway, and we both froze. The sudden intrusion sliced through the charged atmosphere, making every inch of space between us feel sharper, every glance heavier. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway, then back to me, sharper than before, daring me to act even as the moment was threatened. My heart raced, and I could feel my palms grow damp. Every brush of her fingers, every lingering gaze, suddenly carried a heightened urgency. "I didn't hear anyone coming," I stammered, attempting calm, though my voice trembled slightly. She tilted her head, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, a silent acknowledgement of our fragile equilibrium. We resumed our positions, but nothing felt the same. Every movement was amplified, the subtle shift of her shoulder, the accidental brush of our hands, the almost imperceptible tilt of her body toward mine. The interruption had only tightened the tension, the thin thread between restraint and giving and now stretched taut. Her eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, testing me, teasing me. I could feel the pull of her presence, magnetic and inescapable. My fingers hovered near the edge of the notebook, itching to close the gap, but the danger, the uncertainty, made it all the more thrilling. The classroom clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second echoing the anticipation between us. I realized that the interruption had changed the rhythm entirely. What had been a slow, simmering tension now felt like a live wire, ready to spark with the slightest contact. She leaned in slightly, guiding me through a note, and our knees brushed again under the desk. This time, the contact felt charged, deliberate, almost daring. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every fleeting touch screamed of what we both wanted but weren't saying. Even the smallest motions, the flick of her pen, the brush of her hair, sent electric currents through the air. I could feel her awareness of me in every detail, and the classroom seemed to shrink around us, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. Every glance, every slight movement carried weight, every unspoken thought made the air between us almost tangible. I could feel her presence, closer than ever, and my heartbeat thundered in my chest. Her hand hovered near mine again, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. My fingers itched to move, to close the gap, but something held me back, an invisible line neither of us had crossed. The tension was unbearable, charged, like a storm ready to break. She leaned in slightly, her hair brushing my shoulder. My breath hitched. Every nerve in my body was awake, every instinct screaming that the moment was electric, ready to ignite. The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation, broken only by the faint tick of the classroom clock. Her eyes held mine, steady, challenging, daring me to act. And yet the world outside existed only as a distant echo. Nothing else mattered: the hum of the classroom, the scattered papers, the low murmur of voices beyond the door. Everything faded into the background, leaving only the two of us suspended in this fragile, charged space. I moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, and she mirrored the motion, our proximity shrinking further. The brush of her hand against mine, intentional or accidental, sent a shiver up my spine. Every glance, every subtle gesture, was a conversation in itself, unspoken but loud with meaning. The moment felt on the edge of something explosive, the heat between us nearly tangible. My chest tightened, my pulse raced, and yet neither of us moved past the invisible boundary. The anticipation, the longing, the unspoken desire, it all hung suspended, taut and shimmering, ready to spill over at any second. And then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, a sudden, unexpected sound from the hallway, the faint laughter of passing students, pulled us back slightly, leaving the moment unresolved. The energy lingered, electric and raw, a promise unfulfilled, leaving us both suspended on the brink of what could happen next. The classroom finally began to feel normal again, or at least as normal as it could with the electricity that still lingered between us. We had pulled back slightly, yet the closeness remained, subtle and unbroken, a quiet thread connecting us. Her gaze found mine one last time, soft but intense, holding unspoken understanding. I felt it in every tiny gesture, the way she smoothed a strand of hair, the gentle tilt of her head, the faint curve of her lips. It was a silent conversation, rich with memory, with promise, with the tension we both felt in every moment. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of anticipation ease just enough to let the reality of the moment sink in. And yet the heat lingered, quiet, smoldering, undeniable. Every glance we shared carried a reminder of what had been, what nearly happened, and what might still happen someday. She gathered her notes, brushing past me slightly, our arms almost touching, sending another jolt through the air. The smallest touches still resonated, lingering longer than they should. Even in the return to ordinary motions, stacking papers, adjusting her chair, there was a rhythm, an unspoken intimacy that hadn't vanished. "See you tomorrow?" I asked softly, my voice steadier now, though my pulse still fluttered. Her smile was small, knowing, and yes, a little mischievous. "Tomorrow," she said, leaving the word weighted, a promise, a tease, a question all at once. As I left the classroom, the memory of her glance, her subtle movements, and the tension that had pulsed between us clung to me. Nothing had been resolved, but everything had changed. The room might have returned to normal, but we had not. The story lingered in the quiet after the bell, in every glance, every breath, every heartbeat that had carried us through the moments that had almost tipped over. There was fire, unspoken but real, and it would remain, teasing us, waiting for the next chapter.